Better for you to do it at your office or something like that, huh? Well, yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
I live in the country, so in the city things work a little bit better usually.
how far do you have to drive into your office?
About 40 minutes.
Really? Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you're burning the midnight oil. Thank you for joining me on today's program. I hope that we get some interaction here. We look at that. We've got one live viewer already. Thank you for joining us. I am here with Dr. Brian McDonald. I have got his site up here, which is Brains on Games. Don't forget, at the end of this, I will definitely say again to subscribe to his site. But I have you on because you've actually been on my podcast 3 times. And we have talked about psychology twice. And then we talked about role playing games once. And again, like everybody who watches the program, I'm going to go ahead. If you want to jump in and ask some questions, I really want this time to be a time where people can ask questions of my guest and kind of get a flavor of it. Because I've asked you a lot of questions already, but to get the ball rolling, let me ask you about your channel first. Tell me about Brains on Games.
Okay. Well, Brains on Games is something that was sort of brewing in the background for a while in the back of my mind. I am a psychologist, like you said. My practice focuses mostly on working with families with young kids, but especially helping families whose kids are having some trouble at school. So I do what are called psychoeducational assessments, which are all about looking for learning challenges for kids who might have dyslexia or other kinds of learning, ADHD, other kinds of learning issues.
Right.
So I've been doing that for years and years and years. I worked in school settings and in treatment centers, and now I'm in private practice. And I have been recommending for ages that parents play and interact with their kids, and especially playing games where they might be practicing some skill that needs some help to develop in order for them to do the best work that they can possibly do at school. So I've been recommending games for ages.
Right on.
Yeah, so prescribing them practically, if you want to call it that. And when the pandemic forced me to shut my practice down, I found myself becoming quite stressed with no work to do.
Let me say
So,
hi to a couple of guests here we got on here. Hi, Tracy Rothmeyer. Glad you are here. And hi, Georgia Eris. Thank you for joining. I'm here with Dr. Brian McDonald. He is a friend of mine. He's been on the podcast 3 times. And now we're doing a live stream. And he's a psychologist, but you also are a lover of games. And one of the things that I wanted to talk to you about tonight was the fact that you like role-playing games. You grew up with role-playing games, and I'm going to jump right into the controversy on but again, ask any question you want. He's a fellow Gen Xer. Okay, he's a fellow Gen Xer. So if you want to ask him about family ties, I think that he might even have a peculiar interest or even view on I don't know about peculiar. Is that the right word, or an interesting view on family ties? Interesting perspective. That's the word I was looking for.
sure.
Interesting perspective. George Eris says, hi, gentlemen. And Tracy D says D and D. Yes, D and D. That's probably the biggest, most well-known role-playing game, probably outside the community, though, isn't it?
It's the original, right? It's the original, and it's come back into prominence with things like, well, Stranger Things is probably the big, most popular television show that brought it back into the limelight. Community a few years ago. I love those D&D episodes of, well, I'm a Community fan, and I love the D&D episodes of Community.
Me too. I'm a big fan of Community as well. That's one of those shows that's it's almost a different show every time you watch it.
Oh, it's classic. Yeah.
I think they are geniuses that did Community. I didn't care for so much for the last couple seasons, and then that last season that was on Yahoo, which was one of the original streaming services.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that the show suffered as Dan Harmon's mental health improved.
Oh, is that what happened?
That was a part of it. Yeah, he got fired from the show. He was off. He was no longer the showrunner for season 4, and then he came back for seasons 5 and 6. And he had a different work ethic. They weren't burning the midnight oil and forcing people to work until the wee hours. And well, hey, I still love the later seasons. I think
I didn't hate them, but
the VR episode is a great episode.
When they started losing characters, though, when they started
that
losing
is a
characters.
problem. Yeah. I miss Troy. From the second Troy left, that was it. But this isn't even a Gen X show. But if Community comes into the conversation, I can't help but get off on a tangent about it.
I can't.
I met Dan Hartman once.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. What a guy.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Wow. All right. Let's see. Georgia Eris says, I grew up with games like Monopoly. What do you think of games like Monopoly?
Monopoly is a funny one. Like the real hardcore gamers definitely poo-poo Monopoly. And I think most of us, when we were kids, we played it wrong, because if you choose not to buy a property, you're supposed to auction it off, which helps the game to go faster. But nobody really reads the rules for Monopoly. You sort of just know how to play through osmosis, and that's one of the rules that kind of got lost, I think. I never played it that way, but apparently that's what's printed in the written rules. I'm not as much of a fan of games that are about rolling and moving, but I mean, everybody's different, right?
Really? Oh, rolling, because is it because it's more luck?
Well, yeah, it's partly luck, and there's so many other different ways to play games that it just seems like I mean, it's the way that I used to play when I was a kid,
Yeah.
Snakes and ladders, shoots and ladders, they call it now.
Shoots and ladders,
less scary for the kids. I loved Mousetrap. Oh my God, Mousetrap. That was a great roll and move game, because you're building that crazy machine, that contraption in the middle of the board. That was a lot of fun. I like the game of life more than I like Monopoly, I would say.
Oh, really? That's interesting. I like the game of life too. I thought the game of life was a pretty good game. And then Georgia Eris also says Clue. So she likes Monopoly and Clue. Now,
Clue is a great one.
Yeah. Clue's a good one. I enjoyed Clue as well the few times that I actually played it. Many people might not know this. Actually, the people who are here might know this, but my original channel in this venture was a games channel. And that's how I met Dr. Brian originally. But it just didn't do as well. And I loved talking about Gen X culture. And so, and sorry to say this, I'm really sorry to say this, and I don't know if you've dealt with this, Brian, but the gaming community is just so snobbish. like I'm on the community boards and stuff like that, and they're like, we don't want to hear about your game, and that's the stupidest game. Not everybody, but oh my gosh, to try to get into the door and try to like build a channel was really difficult. Where I started doing stuff over here, talking about another passion of mine, which is just growing up Generation X, and people have just like poured out the love on me. So I don't know.
There are gatekeepers, I think, I would say it's not limited to the board gaming community. I think when you're passionate about something that you really love, you can go a little bit off the deep end, I guess.
Right.
I've found the groups that I found, the folks that I work with have been pretty positive and very welcoming. So I haven't been, touch wood, I haven't been involved in too much drama. I know there are a lot of things in the community. I see like things pop up in the news, well, the news feeds of board game designers and publishers and things like that, that are not really cool. But my experience so far, thank goodness, has been a very positive one. And it's hard to argue against encouraging parents to play with their kids.
Yeah, it really is difficult to argue against that. Who would? That's like the joke about I don't know if you heard that Brian Regan joke about people who are like against reading, like they have reading campaigns. Like, is there somebody out there like not saying we shouldn't read?
Yeah. So that's a tough argument to make.
We got a few more interactions here. We got Tracy Rothmeyer is writes, I loved Snakes and Ladders and Cheerio. Now, did they change it from Snakes and Ladders to Shoots and Ladders?
Yeah, well, I remember when I was a kid, Snakes and Ladders. There were no slides. There were snakes that you slid down their backs.
Oh, well, then why is it ladders then? That doesn't make a lot of sense, right? I mean, if
I
it's
guess you could go
snakes
up and
and
down on ladders, but
yeah, well, I guess, I don't know. I mean, it should be like, I don't, elephants and snakes, like because you climb the elephant up and then you slide the snake down.
strange design choices, I guess.
I guess they just weren't
Yeah.
thinking those things through. What about Cheerio? What about that game?
Cheerio is a game that I don't know, honestly. So that's one I'm not too
I
familiar
think
with.
it's like a 3 or 4 year old game where it's basically a counting game, and I think it's
Okay.
a game. It's like got a tree, and you
Mhm.
pull the Cheerios off the tree or something like that. I don't really
Okay.
remember myself, but okay, all right. Let's see. I love Mousetrap. We did play a few games as Life. I think she
Oh
meant
yeah.
like Life.
Yeah, the game
Um,
of life is I really like those careers. I always found it funny what career you drew, and if you wound up changing careers midstream. It's a funny game.
I think I told you once that I'm going to get through a couple more, and then I have some questions about Dungeons and Dragons because that's
Mhm.
really the Gen X game of Gen X games right there. I enjoy playing Candyland.
Candyland. Yeah,
I think I only
that was
played Candyland like once.
I don't think I maybe with cousins. We didn't have Candyland.
Oh,
Mousetrap I remember the most. Of course, checkers and things, everybody I suspect most people played checkers and go fish and crazy eights and stuff like that. And then I
yeah,
remember Risk. Risk is a board game that stands out for me when I was in elementary school. You know,
yeah. Risk is a
take
lot
over
of fun.
Australia and rule the board from there. That was a lot of fun.
Is that how it worked? You take over Australia and then you rule the
Oh,
board?
Australia is perfect because it's so isolated. No, you've only got a few ways that you can be attacked. So you just pile up your soldiers on those gateways. You hold the choke points until you've got enough armies to just go. It's
Yeah,
that's the strategy for Risk. Unless you're playing these new versions, I don't know how the brand new versions work. I've
I
heard
don't know
Star Wars
either.
Risk is very different.
Yeah, I would imagine. I would
Hmm.
imagine they're not trying to take over Australia in the
No,
Star
probably
Wars
not, eh?
risk.
No.
I still like drafts and chess. I've never heard of drafts.
Drafts, I don't know.
Okay.
Chess, I have played, but I've been always more of a fan of games that are like chess, but not chess. And I do not know why. I don't know if it was because I couldn't find
Mm,
partners who wanted to play chess, with me, and then it was only on the computer. Um, but I have more recently been playing games like Hive, The Duke, War Chest. Those are all games that are reminiscent of chess, and they have a lot of this similar elements to chess, but they're of course a little different.
yeah. Did you ever play the game Element? Have you played that game yet?
Elements.
Element. It's
It's
it's 4 people, and then
uh
you have like either water or fire, or
yeah.
and the water travels and the fire goes.
Hmm.
The fire will light up, and then one cancels out the other. And basically the idea is there's you can either have 2 to 4 people,
Hmm.
and the idea is to box one in so they can't make a move.
Okay.
And
I think that game was on my like I had like a notes on my phone, and that was one
yeah,
of the games I think that was on my list to look into, but I
that's
never did manage to
that's
pick it
one
up.
of it's a really one of those games that's a strategy game, but it's a little bit more, more than what people who are into chess. If you think chess is a little too boring, this has got a little bit more interaction to it.
Hmm.
But I'm a chess fan. I
There
was
you go.
I mean, I there was a couple years there where I was doing hardly anything but playing chess. I'd get up and, well, I mean, other than working and stuff, I mean, I had to work, but I would come home and I would play chess, and I had chess friends, and I went to the chess club that was here,
Yeah.
and I did that for a little while, not for, I don't, it just, I get into things sometimes. I got into
Yeah.
magic tricks too.
When I was in university, I lived in residence when I was doing my undergraduate degree. So this would have been early 90s.
Hmm.
And at that time in res, it was Cribbage and hearts were the games that we played, and it was
Okay.
like constant when we weren't watching Twin Peaks, because that's what was on TV at the time. It was
Right.
cribbage and hearts. Yeah.
I liked hearts. I never played cribbage. I did play
Hmm.
hearts though. Shoot the moon, man. Shoot the moon.
Oh yeah.
All
Yep.
right.
You got to
All
take a
right.
chance.
My husband plays history games like the Western Front. I've never even
Ah,
heard of the Western Front.
you know what? Those kinds of games are like a perfect segue into Dungeons and Dragons, because that's where it all began.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Tell us.
Gygax and his friends were war gamers.
Oh,
Like the big, like, blocks on a map kind of war gamers. So they were reenacting historic battles, and it was, I think it started with like a game called, Chainmail, I want to say, was one of, it's been a while since I read the book about the history of Gygax's involvements with games. But yeah, they were war gamers and strategy, like tactical gamers. And they developed some rules that included not just the big tactical battles with hundreds of troops, but some individual characters or heroes within the game that could impact the game somehow in a different way, some special hero unit that could
mm,
affect the game. So they started to develop some tactical one-on-one combat. So it wasn't just, the big Napoleonic armies. They started to develop some rules that were about swords, like individual soldiers and their swords, and
right.
eventually brought magic into it. And eventually, things sort of slowly kind of evolved until they got to the point where you could carry a character forward from one play session to the next, and they would develop over time.
Yeah, yeah. That's wow. You're a wealth of knowledge there. I think this is like I started getting into Trivial Pursuit. I did a video on my other channel,
Uh-huh.
and it's called The Only Game I Can Get My Wife to Play because my wife can't stand board games.
Uh-huh.
But there is one game she'll play because her family played it on New Year's Eve. And so we have we have even some really classic and vintage games of Trivial Pursuit.
Mm-hmm.
Probably some of the oldest ones. The other game she will kind of play sometimes is Scrabble, but I've never played it and we've never played it together. But
Okay.
yeah.
I'm gonna give you a little tidbit for something that your wife might like, because there's a game that's up on Kickstarter right now that's
Oh,
created by the folks behind a web comic called Saturday Morning Breakfast Cereal.
okay.
So these are professors. They're pretty sciencey folks, and they have a trivia game coming out called Everyone Else Thinks This Game Is Awesome. And it's some pretty sciencey questions, but you're not only answering the question, other players are kind of betting on who they think will have the right answer. Like, did they get it right or wrong? So you can sort of still be involved in the game, even if you're pretty clueless about the subject, if you trust that other player, which I think is kind of an interesting mechanic compared to
Yeah.
Trivial Pursuit.
Well, one of the things we talked about when we talked about D&D is and I got to give this because I got to talk to Tracy Rothmeyers about this. And that is the very first time that I ever played Dungeons and Dragons was the very first time I was ever introduced to a band called, do you remember the name of the band that I mentioned? Skinny Puppy.
Oh, that's right. Skinny Puppy, yes.
Now, did you hardcore? Now, Tracy, do you know that band? No, I have to ask you that. And then I have to ask you, Dr. Brian, what kind of music were you listening to when you were playing Trivial Pursuit? Because these guys were all into like underground kind of music stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Now let me think. Do we have music? Yeah. Often we didn't have music when we played those games. I'm gonna say the times that we did use music was when we were playing Vampire the Masquerade. So that would have been in the 90s again, early 90s. And it would have been, oh my goodness, Bauhaus. It would have been Sisters of Mercy.
Oh, Sisters of Mercy. All right,
Yeah.
Tracy.
Yeah.
Have you heard of, you said, now look, you said yes on the Skinny Puppy. Now, what about Sisters of Mercy? Did you listen to Sisters of Mercy? I
Skinny.
think the first game that I ever played was, I think, right around like 1990 or 1991, somewhere around
Hmm.
there. And
Hmm.
of course, I had heard about it before, but I mean, my involvement, particularly in the 80s, I wasn't really involved in the 80s, but of course I heard about it, and everything I heard about it was negative. I mean, this was the devil's game. People are going nuts
Hmm.
listening to playing this game. They're gonna go crazy if you
Yeah.
play this game. You're gonna get your
Yeah.
soul possessed or something like that. What
Uh-huh.
and then I want to hear Tracy Rothmeyer says, of course, we can't
Yeah.
stump her on any underground bands. Although I do have that one underground band that I don't know if you've listened to yet. I actually, maybe I'll send a link at the end of this. But I really want your opinion. I listened to Neil Diamond and Elton John. I get it.
Perfect.
I love it.
That's
I
good
love
too.
it. What
That's
was
good
this
too.
deal with Devil, and what did it affect you? Did you have any backlash? Were people coming up to you and going, Brian, I know you play this D&D game, and I'd really like to talk to you about your soul?
Yeah, that would be pretty funny if they did. I mean, I was an altar boy back then. Like I was, I lived up the hill from a Catholic church, and I went to Catholic school in elementary school. So no, I didn't have any of that. Now, partly that was because we started with Dungeons and Dragons, but we quickly branched out into lots of other similar kinds of games, but in different genres. So we played the superhero ones and the spy ones, and those kind of took off with our group a little bit more. And then we got into some science fiction ones that lasted for quite a while. And we didn't stick with the Dungeons and Dragons for super, super long time. But that stuff started pretty early in the D&D, in the development, I guess, of
Right.
Dungeons and Dragons. It was before the 80s. It was late 70s where a kid attempted suicide in some tunnels underneath his university,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and then they found out that he was playing a D&D game, and someone kind of jumped to conclusions, and the press jumped on it and said that that's what they were doing in the tunnels. They were doing like live action, and he couldn't distinguish between fantasy and reality, and the game was taking him over. And then they made a movie of it in 1982, right, with Tom
With Tom
Hanks.
Hanks. What's the
So
name of
there
that
was
movie? What's the name of it?
that was Mazes and Monsters.
Mazes and Monsters. Right.
So they're so like with the names they came up with for these games, because Dungeons and Dragons came out soon after that was Tunnels and Trolls, and
Okay.
then the made up game that they had for that movie was Mazes and Monsters, but it was clear what they were talking about. It wasn't a fictional game, but
Right.
there was a novel that was a fictionalized account of what had happened, and then the movie was based on the novel, and it kind of rolled from there. And then it was around the same time they were putting stickers on music albums, right?
Yeah.
So
Well, I don't look. I knew about Dungeons and Dragons, and I knew about the controversy around it, but I really wasn't like involved with it because it just wasn't something that I was doing. I was more the things that were people were saying with me was more about the kind of music I was listening to. Because back in the 80s, especially like the late 80s, I was really into like Motley Crue and the Pentagram and all this that kind of stuff. But one time I was with this church group, and I was maybe 15, no, maybe 16, I can't remember, because yeah, it was 1988 or 89, so it was before the 90s. And it was this thing called Youth with a Mission. I don't know if you ever heard of it, YWAM, but they did this thing where they ran a torch across America for Jesus.
okay.
And but you, I mean, it wasn't the same person running. You'd run, and then you do quarter mile. And I did one of these quarter miles because it came through my town, and my town's close to Vegas, and we went down to Vegas, and we stayed at a church down there. And the guy at the church was folding up these tracks basically that's something about the dangers of D&D and stuff, and how he was going to go and give these away at the park. And then when I played D&D for the first time, now I do understand that there is an element of, at least in some aspects of it, there's some element of like nefarious magic and stuff like that a Christian might not necessarily want to get involved with. But as far as like they like their characters and stuff, but it wasn't like they were obsessed with it. I didn't meet anybody, and I knew a fair number of people who played D&D. And I didn't ever think that I thought the Christian community kind of went a little too crazy on that, if you know what I mean, what I'm saying.
Well, I think it did get a little bit, and I purposely mentioned the groups that were like Tipper Gore's group, whose name escapes me right now, who was putting the parental advisory,
the PMRC, right?
So they were putting parental advisory on albums, and I remember there was Frank Zappa released an instrumental album, and he got an explicit lyrics advisory on it because of all of his other music. So whoever put the sticker on there didn't really listen. These people weren't ever playing those games. So there was a group called BAD, which was Bothered About Dungeons and Dragons, and they were kind of using these sort of shady statistics to indicate that most people who were playing were committing suicide and leaving their families and joining cults, and none of that was accurate.
I didn't see any of that personally, but it wasn't like I was, it wasn't like I was hanging out with a lot of like, I don't know. It wasn't like everybody in the group was like, oh, we used to go to an evangelical church and now we don't because of this dang Dungeons and Dragons. That's not kind of what happened. And Tracy Rothmeyer is right. What's a nice Jewish girl like you playing D&D? So that's what they said to you, Tracy. I'm imagining they came up to you and said, "Hey, Tracy," because I would have asked the good doctor here, what's a good Catholic boy playing the devil's game or something like that for? And maybe somebody would have asked me, what's an evangelical Christian playing D&D? Although I didn't really play it that much, but I could see that somebody asking you, what's a good Jewish girl playing D&D for?
They took the devils and demons out of the monster manual, I think, for the second edition. So they kind of were responding to the parents' reactions to it.
Yeah.
It wasn't anything that really entered into it where we were. Nobody had really heard about those kinds of games except for me and a few of my friends. So nobody knew what we were up to other than my parents and their parents.
And like you said, too, it wasn't all role-playing games. You got into there were science fiction role-playing games as well, which I'm sure you enjoyed as much as I played the Star Trek one. I think I told you the Star Trek role-playing game.
Yeah, which is a good one.
That was a lot of fun. What other, you said there were superhero ones. When did those come out?
Yeah, TSR had an early one in the early 80s, a Marvel universe game. We played the DC game. So I think my feeling at the time was, well, I was more of a Batman fan, maybe. I loved Spider-Man, but I didn't like the rules for the TSR game as much. And I felt like the DC one was much more flexible in terms of being able to create characters. And so my friends were pretty imaginative about the characters that they came up with. I remember we had one guy who could make himself flat. His name was, I think he called himself Flapjack or Paperback or something like that. I don't remember, but he could make himself two-dimensional so he could be invisible if he turned sideways.
Oh, wow.
Those are the kinds of things that it wasn't anything crazy.
That was right out of the Twilight Zone, or the Outer Limits. I don't know if you remember that episode or not, where they ran into it. They ran into a two-dimensional being, and if he was sideways, you couldn't see him, but that if he was flat, you could see him. Now, speaking of games, have you seen? There's a game that you can play that's four-dimensional. It's a four-dimensional. It's online. Have you heard of that? Like, type it into YouTube and you can see some videos on it. But but there's some simple stuff like you're just trying to roll these balls into a hole, but you go in and out of the fourth dimension. and it's supposed to be kind of sciencey, I mean,
All
way
right.
past what I could understand, way past what
Okay.
I understand in science.
Huh.
But basically the balls shrink, they cut in half as you're moving them, they get bigger, it's really
Wow.
hard to push them and get them around the table because they
I'll have to
just
take a look.
yeah, it's very interesting, and it's really supposed to be based on the science of the fourth dimension, which I don't know if it's time. Some of them disappear, so like you're trying to move the ball and it'll disappear on you, and then
All right.
they're real simple games. I think it's called four dimensional toys. I don't know if it's a game. It's called four dimensional toys, but
Like a
yeah.
puzzle almost, or yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
Huh.
it's
I'll have to
a
look
lot
into
of
it.
fun. It's a lot
Yeah.
of fun. I think it's actually free too on the actual site, but you can see it
Hmm.
on YouTube. All right, so so tell me a little bit about the science fiction games of the 80s. What came out in the 80s for science fiction games?
Well, I mean, the original science fiction role-playing game was a game called Traveler, and that's a universe spanning, a galactic spanning kind of a role-playing game that was very sciencey and very statistical with charts and tables that it was too complex and slow for me to play. So I
Mm,
never did get into Traveler. The games I played in the 80s that were more science fiction, there were two main ones. We played Paranoia for a long time. We quite enjoyed the Paranoia setting. That was a lot of fun, and we
I've
played the Star
never.
Wars role-playing game.
Oh, I've heard of the Star Wars one, of course, but I've not heard of the Paranoia one. What's that one about?
Paranoia was I can't it was the back of the box. Something in the back of the box sold me. I think they compared it to they said it's the game that's like Monty Python meets George Orwell. And I thought, well, those are two things that I like, but I've never thought of them mixed together. So it was a story about a post-apocalyptic kind of a future where everybody's living in these complexes. So these cities that are domed and they're sort of like Fallout, I
Hmm.
guess, similar to the Fallout video game. Uh, but the cities are run by, or their complexes are run by a benevolent computer, an AI, that's somehow been corrupted with 1950s communist propaganda. So the idea of the game is that the players are troubleshooters whose job is to shoot trouble. And the trouble that they have to shoot is anyone who might be a communist or anyone who might be involved in a secret society or anyone who might have developed mutant powers. But all of the players are in secret societies and they all have mutant powers. So they're all traitors, and each of them knows, each of the players knows, their characters don't know that they're all traitors, but they're all sort of, they also each had all their own missions. And it was a real competitive sort of a role playing game as opposed to a cooperative one. But you
Yeah.
had to be very careful because if you said the wrong thing, everybody else was going to shoot you because you might be a traitor to the computer.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Wow. So you had to
And
be
it
real.
was ridiculous. You had six clones of yourself, so if one clone died, you basically got another one with the same name and a different number at the end. So
Right on. All right,
it was
Mr.
pretty ridiculous.
79 man says, ENC, great to see you tonight. Thank you. Hey, please, Mr. Everybody on here, please go to Brian's channel and subscribe. It would really mean a lot to him and it would mean a lot to me as well. And it's free to do. It's absolutely free to subscribe. And Tracy Rothmeyer's writes, made actually in the 60s was played the 3D chess like they had in Star Trek when I was in high school. I never played 3D chess, you know?
Yeah.
I've got a board around here somewhere actually, but I don't know how it works. So
Hmm.
3D chess. And then Mr. 79 Man says, Brian, I have been getting into poker lately. I'm tempted to go to the casino and give it a shot for money. Your thoughts? Do you want his thoughts? Now, this guy is a psychologist. He has is it a PhD or a PSY? I forgot.
A PhD.
A
Yeah.
PhD. He has a PhD in psychology, and we're both doctors. So I've got some advice for you too. But shoot, Dr. Brian, you're the guest.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Well, obviously, although I'm a psychologist, I'm not Mr. 79 man psychologist. So, always, you
This is
know,
like,
if
this is like, hey, listen, this is just advice. You take it on your
yes,
own.
the disclaimer.
Yeah, the disclaimer.
Look, those the casinos are tough, right? Because they are totally designed to suck you in and get you to spend your money. And of course, the house in the end is always going to be the winner. Uh, it's
It's not a
poker.
charity.
Yeah, poker is definitely addictive. It is. It's based um, on a reinforcement model that really does get people into it. I have never been a big fan because I'm not patient enough. So I'm not good at poker because I can't wait and wait and wait until I get just the right hand in order to do the thing that I want to do. So also I don't have a poker face. Like I'm not very good. I'm not
Like
very good at hiding my
you couldn't,
reactions to
you
things.
couldn't hide it. Some people are
So I
chatting
couldn't
with
hide
each
it.
other here, but then, haha, thank you guys. Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I don't think it's the smartest thing to do with your money, but I don't. It's not the smartest thing to do with your money for sure.
Well,
Um,
Norm Macdonald is one. You could look at Norm Macdonald's story and see what happened when he started gambling his money.
oh no, really?
No,
What
it
happened there?
didn't go well. Norm, he was not a. Although if you listen to his autobiography, he talks about drugs and things like that. But he wasn't a big drinker. He wasn't really big into drugs. He was a gambling addict, and I think he destroyed some relationships that way, if I remember the stories correctly from back in the day.
I don't. I don't know too many people who are like, yeah, I mean, it's like the lottery. You know what I mean? It's not like you get a lot of people who are like, yeah, man, I did it in Vegas, and I suggest you do it too. I think
Well,
you get a lot more stories with people like, I've ruined my life.
yeah, yeah. I think there's one person I've met who he became uh, he became wealthy initially from doing like mail order VHS tapes. And then he created, based on the money he made from mailing out VHS tapes about dating, I think it was dating advice. He started an internet company, and then he made lots of money on the internet because he was sort of on the ground floor when the internet stuff started to take off. And then he retired at a very young age, before he was 30, and went to the World Series of Poker and decided to spend his money that way. But he didn't have that personality where he got sucked into it. He sort of said, "This is how much I'm willing to put aside for this, and I'm not going to." He didn't
Right.
chase after more,
Let
so
me
he was very
just
disciplined.
let me just say that I think that trying to win money playing poker is probably a worse idea than playing Dungeons and Dragons. Just gonna go out on a limb and say that. I think that's if you have any Judeo-Christian ethic in your background at all, I think that one's a little. Now, look, I don't care if you go to Vegas and you want to have some fun, blow $20 or whatever. But as far as that's concerned, I think he was jesting anyway. But I thought we'd make a big deal out of it, right?
Yeah, and so we
And
did.
George Eris says,
More of a
I am more of
blackjack.
a blackjack gal. All right. Go to Vegas. Yeah, we're
Yeah.
going to go. All right. I'll drive the bus. You get here and I'll drive you to Vegas. Here. Monopoly for dollars. For a little side bet on that stuff there to see who will get the most of the money, right? I don't know did you ever do that? Did you ever play anything? Did you ever make bets on any of the games you ever played?
Oh, did we ever play games for money? I mean, sometimes for crib, sometimes we would have a crib tournament where there was money involved. We did have some fundraisers that involved some sort of pay to play where you would win half the pot. But really, it was about raising money for a charity. So,
And the charity is me.
well, yeah, I guess so.
No, I'm just kidding.
I never won those ones. I think my son once got his name on a trophy for poker at a fundraiser, but
Oh, cool.
I never could stick with it that long.
That's really cool. All right, guys, let's hear from you. Tracy Rothmeyer, I actually have I got to here's a playlist of a band, and everyone's welcome to listen. I think this is one of my favorite bands, one of my favorite albums. He's one of my favorite artists. Let me say that, to kind of change the subject just a little bit. But as long as I have you here, Tracy, and everyone else too, there is Huntington Beach by a band named Lifesavers, who was kind of an early punk band. And actually, he was a punk band in the 70s when it came out. And his original band was called the High Tops. And there's 2 tracks on that album that I just sent you a link to, where he did some stuff with the High Tops. But the guy's name's Mike Knott, and he's done everything. And that's one of my favorite albums of his. So please listen to that. Let's see here. Mr. 79 Man says, my family and I play the card game Uno for fun. It can get cutthroat sometimes. I'm sure it can.
Uno does that, yeah.
Do you ever get cutthroat? Did you ever have that happen? Do you ever have bad experiences with the games?
Not every once in a while, but not very often. It certainly depends on who you play with. And we usually had groups that were fairly easygoing. So especially if you're playing with kids, right? Sometimes the kids will get cutthroat with each other.
Mm-hmm.
But
they get mad. Sometimes they feel like they're being cheated.
Yeah, sometimes that can happen.
Yeah.
So hopefully you're able to work through that part of it, because otherwise nobody's going to want to play with them, right? But yeah, one of my kids is super sneaky about games, so he'll do things like he'll make sure that nobody else knows how many coins he has stacked up for whatever the game is that we're playing, or he doesn't want to count his points until the end, so that he sort of has it calculated out and nobody knows that he won. So he's a pretty sneaky come from behind guy.
Yeah, okay, I got it. Have you ever had any? I had this one experience where a lot of people I played martial arts with, or not played martial arts with, I did martial arts with, also did Dungeons and Dragons, especially my 2 senior instructors. They were into Dungeons and Dragons. And the dungeon master guy, like, sometimes didn't want us to win. Like, he'd do some ridiculous things. Like, he'd say, like, okay, you go into a room and there's 50 dragons. And like, oh gosh. So you got to roll for these. Just this ridiculous stuff. Did you ever experience that where the dungeon master was kind of not on your side, or didn't want you to win or whatever?
I mean, that was the way that the game used to be. Originally, it was very much a battle between the dungeon master and the players, and dungeon masters used to brag about how many characters they killed. Most of the time, the dungeon masters or game masters that I've played with have recognized that their role is to make sure everybody has fun as the organizer of the game. So usually it doesn't go that way. My current DM likes to try and take some players down. It hasn't happened yet, touch wood. I think we had 1 martyr in the entire campaign so far, but yeah, we've had some pretty intense combat in his games. But we've made it through, not unscathed. But
now, when if you build a character and it dies in a game, does it die? Can you bring that character back or into the next one, or is that it for that character?
Well, I mean, it depends on the game, right? With Paranoia, you had your 6 clones, so definitely the next one would be decanted if one of your clones died, but you were expected to die in that game. Dungeons and Dragons had resurrection spells.
Okay.
So it was potentially, it was possible. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I didn't know. I guess let me say this. I never really thought about it, but in thinking about it, I know that people are like, oh, I don't want my character to die. I don't want my character to die. And I was just thought, well, maybe, if it dies, then you got to build a new character and you got to build all that stuff back up that you earned. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, it can be. Oh yeah.
George,
there can be sibling competition with board games, right?
Yes, my siblings and I would get cutthroat on these the games. Yeah, I didn't ever really have that. One of the things that I've done here, and it wasn't really really conscious, but just the games that I've bought have been a lot of cooperative games. Like both Back to the Futures are cooperative. There's been a couple of games that weren't cooperative, though. I mean, they were competition, but all the cooperative games, I know that there's a tendency for somebody to kind of quarterback. Like, don't do that. Don't make that decision. I'll make this decision for you. But with me, I never really had that experience in those cooperative games. I don't know if you ever had somebody quarterbacking in cooperative games or not.
Yeah, I mean, the alpha player is a problem, and some games work hard to overcome it, and other designers are like, that's really for the players to deal with on their own. It shouldn't have to be the game designer who's preventing it from happening. So
did you see
Go ahead.
Sorry. Did you see any progression in games from because you've been a gamer for a long time, and I know we're talking about role-playing games, but what about just other games? Is there like a real demarcation of game stepping forward at some point, like either in the 80s or 90s or 2000s, where like this kind of got supered up, kind of maybe akin to the difference between like Atari and Mario Brothers kind of, and Nintendo kind of a thing, whereas it's like, yeah, we're on a new level. We are not rolling and moving stuff anymore. We are rolling, moving, and jumping.
I think that Settlers of Catan sort of opened the gates for new things to happen in board games, and in the past 15 years, there's been a real explosion in games and new kinds of games that hadn't been even thought of before.
Yeah.
So, and games with extra deluxe components, right? That like metal coins for a board game that you're playing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that there has been an explosion. It started when games from Germany came over to the US, like Catan did, and since then it's only kind of rolled down like a snowball, right? It's getting bigger and bigger and bigger, it seems.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right.
I mean, Kickstarter is a crowdfunding platform, and they have a crowdfunding thing now that's only for board games.
Oh, really? They've got one for just board games. So you sign up and you go, oh, I'm just board games.
Gamebound.
Yeah. Wow. Being an only kid, I was happy when games like Simon came out. Yeah, I thought Simon was an awesome game. I loved Simon. Yeah. I kicked Simon's butt. Yeah. I got to tell you, and I'm bragging on myself here. I've got an extraordinarily good memory, and God has blessed me with an extraordinarily good memory. And I think I shared this with you, Dr. Brian, because as a kid, I had learning disability, which I could not read for years, but I would memorize the page as somebody would read it. And they actually took them a while for them to realize that I could not read. They'd point to a word and I couldn't read it, but I could tell you what was on the page. Mm-hmm. And of course that went down a little bit with the drug use in the 90s. But yeah, I mean, people would hand me Simon and they'd be like, 2 rounds it over. And I was just like, I don't know if I could do it now. Really, I'm not sure I could, but I loved those memory games. And I got tested every year. And every year they said it wasn't eidetic. It wasn't an eidetic memory. Mm-hmm. But then I don't even know if that's a real thing or not. I'm not even sure. But is it a real thing? Is eidetic a real thing?
It is a thing.
Okay. All right. They often told me that I was because they would, again, because I couldn't read in school. And so every year I'd go through all these tests. And every year they said, this kid's got the best memory of anybody we've tested. Now, that doesn't mean I had the best memory of any doctor who ever tested. But right. Out of the people that they tested, they said that I was doing the best that they ever saw. So, mm-hmm. so Simon, to come around back to I loved Simon. I get you, Tracy. I get you. All right. We made a darn sure and we learned to play so we could have a chance to win next time.
That's what you have to do with those siblings.
All right. We've only got a few more minutes here. I got to respect Dr. Brian's time because he's got to get back home, but I want to get through some of these again here. Electric football or hockey?
Yeah.
Yeah. Those little
I like the
dots on the
electronic
screen.
pinball games. We had
Oh
the
yeah.
little pinball that sort of the little red LED would go up through.
Yeah, yeah, I
I
remember
thought that
that.
was fun.
And Speak and Say, remember that?
Mm-hmm.
That was, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
it wasn't, they had some games on there. You know, they had some
Yep.
games, but it was mostly learning game. At
76.
last time I played Simon was 1976. Have you played that Bopper game though? That game throws me. I got to
Yeah.
admit that game that I can't keep up with that one. That
That's
one's
reaction time, though. That's not memory. That's reaction time.
oh, is it?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
twist, turn, and then twist,
Yeah.
turn, and then twist, turn, hit, and then that's a fun one. I've played that a few times, but I'm not as good at that game as I was at just pressing the Simon button. They used to have the Simon button at the Little Caesars, and I would always go win something. Did you ever see those? Did they have those in Canada? Well,
No, I
like
didn't
you
see
speak
one.
for all of Canada, right? It's like
Okay,
you're
yeah.
from Canada, so you speak for all of Canada. But
I
we're
am. Do you know Gordy? Yeah, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
But they had a little Caesar Simon thing, and you could win stuff. You could win like a drink or a free pizza or something like that. And you go in and you drop your quarter in, and you and they were planning on making money on me, but they never made any money on me. I always beat the house on that one.
That's the way to do it.
I thought one time about getting into card counting, but I know that that's going to go nowhere.
Okay. Well, maybe a good exercise, a good memory exercise, but otherwise.
Right. Oh yeah, that's what she said. All right, everyone. Hey, listen, I'm gonna put Brian's what's the name I'm looking for? Link for the channel. Yeah, I have such a good memory that I can't remember the name for links of channels. I get stuck on words though. Like I get stuck on the word. Like I know the word, but I can tell you like I can almost recount everything that happened in a conversation I had 20 years ago.
Oh my God.
But I can't tell you the name of the person that I had the conversation with.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll meet him at the store. I'm like, no, you remember you were gonna buy gas, and I said, hey, and you said, hey, and I said, hey, I saw your license plate was from Texas, and you were gonna move here, and they're like looking at me like, oh man, it's a little
How do
weird.
you remember this? I don't remember that at all.
Yeah. Anyway, please go to his channel. I know it would mean a lot to him to get a few more subscribers out of this, and it's totally free to do. And I'm going to be on Dave's channel tomorrow night. I'm going to be talking about 80s entertainment with him, and it's going to be a lot of fun. We're talking about Married with Children and MacGyver and all that cool stuff. So if you have a chance to check that out, I know that a lot of you are here from Dave's channel, but I will see you tomorrow night on Dave's channel. Brian, thank you so much. I really appreciate you doing this. This was a blast to have you on and to answer these questions with people. We had a lot of fun. We should do this again sometime.
Absolutely. I feel like I'm almost your guest host sometimes.
Oh yeah, yeah.
We've hung out together 3 times now. What?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Well, hey, the good times won't stop rolling for sure.
No,
all right, everyone.
No, it was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, thank you, and thank you everyone for watching. And make sure you go listen to that band, Lifesavers. Good band, really good band. All right, take care, everyone. We will talk to you.